Iran's presidential elections, June 2009. The incumbent leader, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, announced his victory, but many analysts voiced doubts about the authenticity of the results. During a series of protests staged in Tehran, the authorities clamped down and made many arrests. Among them was Maziar Bahari, correspondent for US magazine Newsweek, whose wife Paula was pregnant at the time.
The moment you start speculating about what he's going through and will he be there for the birth, that's when I feel my morale is it just goes lower and lower, and that I feel distraught, and then I physically feel distraught.
Bahari says he was taken from his apartment, accused of being a spy, and forced to make a false confession. He was detained by the Iranian government for 118 days in solitary confinement at Evin prison in Tehran. He was eventually freed in October and joined his wife to witness the birth of his daughter. Human Rights Watch has documented extensive patterns of arbitrary detentions and prison torture against opposition journalists and anyone perceived as a critic in Iran. To talk about his ordeal, Maziar Bahari is our connector of the day.
Well, a far cry from solitary confinement, of course, but Maziar Bahari is now here in London, CNN London, and instead of asking the questions, the Newsweek correspondent is ready to answer them. Maziar Bahari joins me now. He's your connector of the day. First of all, a question from me. Congratulations on the birth of your daughter. What was it like seeing her? Because I guess you went through, at one point in your mind, the thought that you would never meet her.
Well, you know, I never thought that. I always knew that I would be in London for her birth. And maybe that's what kept me alive, and that was what kept me strong. It's amazing. She's a miracle baby. And it's just amazing that I owe so much to her. You know, it's very strange for a parent to owe so much to a baby, but I feel that. I feel that she was the heart and soul of the campaign that was for my release.
It must have given you great hope, as you say. Just take us through a typical day in that notorious prison in Tehran.
Well, there was no typical day. There were two kinds of days. One, sometimes I was interrogated for long hours. Sometimes I was just left alone for 8 or 9 days. And I didn't know what was happening to me. And during 3 months for 3 months during my imprisonment, my interrogator always told me that I was going to be executed next time I was going to see him. And you know, the worst thing about solitary confinement was solitary confinement itself. The fact that I was alone in the cell, and I didn't know what was happening to me. I only had a copy of the Quran and a book of prayers to read. And I just had to wait for other people to make decisions for me. And I was isolated from the rest of the world. I didn't know anything about the campaign. I didn't know anything about what my friends and colleagues and my wife Paula was doing for me.
Let's get to the questions. Lana's written in to ask, do you regret pursuing the truth to the point of being jailed? I guess you weren't expecting to be jailed.
Well, I always try to be a fair and balanced journalist, and I think one of the reasons that the Revolutionary Guards arrested me was because I was a fair and balanced journalist, and they could not understand fairness. For them, the Revolutionary Guards, they're very ideological. They see the world in black and white, and for them, someone like me who sees the world in shades of gray was not tolerable, and that's why they arrested me. And answering her question, no, I don't regret that. I'm going to be a fair and balanced journalist after I do these interviews, and I will continue my work as a filmmaker and journalist.
Okay, Steffi from Germany wants to know, what will you tell your baby about the experience of your controversial election in Iran and your time in jail? Are you going to tell her everything? And how are you going to tell her?
I think I will tell her everything because I think I owe it to her, really. I think she has to know what she did for me, and she has to know how precious life is and how lucky she is that she lives, that she will be living in a country where, you know, she can work freely. And I will also tell her in order to prevent her from being a journalist and go to Iran.
Nikos P. simply asks, who won the election, Mr. Bahari? Was there a fraud?
I think there was a fraud, but thinking back at the election, I think Ahmadinejad won the votes. I think the main fraud was before the elections. I think Ahmadinejad, by using the oil money and by using government resources, manipulated people all around the country and distributed money to different small towns and villages like there was no tomorrow. And I think the main fraud was before the elections. And I think he won the votes, but not with that margin. I think the margin was less than what was announced.
Okay, and A. Smith has written in to suggest a comparison between Guantanamo Bay and other CIA offshore secret prisons and the prison you were in, Evin prison. He says you were forced to make a false confession, then considered suicide. Is that right? Did you consider suicide?
I considered suicide for a couple of seconds twice.
But your daughter got you through, I guess.
Exactly,
okay.
When I thought about her.
He continues, why is it Senator John McCain stating that the CIA kidnapped prisoners on confessions under torture are valid?
I highly doubt that Senator McCain condoned torture, because he was subjected to torture in Vietnam himself, and he was very vocal against torture. But nonetheless, I think any support for torture, any legitimization of torture is wrong, irresponsible, and dangerous. So I don't think that anyone should support torture in any situation. And intelligence people, they don't use torture either. Sophisticated intelligence organizations don't use torture.